They said he didn't belong, that his skin made him dangerous. But when no one else stepped forward, he paid for her freedom without saying a word. In a town where hate walked proudly in daylight, a black man quietly rewrote the meaning of courage. This isn't just a story of love. It's about dignity, defiance, and reclaiming your place in a world that tried to erase you. The town of Hollow Creek wasn't known for mercy. It sat cracked and crooked under the Texas sky, held together by spit, grudges, and the kind of rules that changed depending on the color of your skin. At high noon, the center square burned with heat and judgment, and on that particular day, something worse. A girl was being sold. She stood barefoot on a wagon plank, hands bound, hair hanging in matted ropes over her face. She didn't flinch, didn't speak. Her dress was ripped at the sleeves, stained with what looked like dried soup or blood. Her eyes, though, pale and wide, scanned the crowd without panic, like someone who'd stopped expecting kindness long ago. Men jeered, a few whistled. The auctioneer barked half-drunk numbers into the heat. She's clean, quiet, no fuss, can't talk, barely hears, but she cooks and don't bite. Who'll start me at 10? From the edge of the square, Elijah Booker watched. He wasn't there to buy anything. He rarely came to town at all unless he needed feed or tools. The stares followed him wherever he walked. The only black man for miles who owned land outright, and no one in Hollow Creek had ever forgiven him for that. His hands were calloused, skin dark and weather-worn. A wide hat shielded his face, but everyone knew who he was. A man with dignity and silence where most expected bowed heads and shuffling feet. He watched the girl, the way her fingers curled around the rope at her wrist. She wasn't crying. She wasn't begging. She just endured. A man in the crowd shouted, 15! Another called, 20! Only if she comes with a muzzle. Laughter followed, ugly and quick. The girl's eyes lifted then, and for a moment they met his. Just a second. But something in that look made Elijah's stomach twist. It wasn't pleading. It was something closer to recognition. Like two people who had both been caged by different chains and could still smell iron on each other. 25! A third voice snapped. Elijah's voice broke the heat like thunder. 30! Silence. All heads turned toward him. Someone coughed. A boy whispered, "That colored fella just 30! From the dark one!" the auctioneer bellowed, amused. "Well now, what's the world coming to?" The next bid didn't come. Elijah didn't move. The girl didn't blink. The hammer dropped. "Sold!" He stepped forward without a word, counted the silver with slow, measured hands. When the rope was offered to him, he stared at it like it was something rotten. Then he took a knife from his belt and cut it clean. The girl didn't run. She stepped beside him, close but not clinging. She followed him past the stairs, past the muttering shopkeepers, past the preacher who turned his head away. When they reached his cart, Elijah helped her up, then climbed aboard. Neither of them looked back. The road out of Hollow Creek stretched long into the hills. Trees thinned. Dust rose behind the wagon like smoke trailing a fire already burned. Elijah didn't speak, didn't offer her name or comfort. He just drove. The mule knew the way. Beside him, the girl sat still, arms folded around herself, watching the horizon like it might swallow her whole. Then, as the sun dipped low behind the ridge, she reached out, hesitantly, and brushed his coat sleeve with the tips of her fingers. Just once. He didn't turn. But his grip on the reins loosened. Whatever that moment was, it wasn't ownership. It wasn't rescue. It was something wordless. Like survival recognizing survival. Elijah's ranch wasn't much to look at from the road. Just a few weathered fences, a crooked barn, and a house with one leaning chimney and two rocking chairs that creaked even when empty. But it was land he had earned, with blood in his palms and sweat in the soil. No one had ever given him a thing, and no one ever would. Clara didn't speak. Not on the first day. Not the second. Elijah didn't press. He had no use for noise, and the silence between them was easier than false kindness. She slept in the small spare room, more of a storage shed with walls. where the window faced east. Elijah left a basin, clean towels, and a bar of soap wrapped in brown paper. He didn't knock. He didn't hover. But each morning, she was up before him. At first, she sat near the steps, legs drawn in like a child hiding from lightning. By the third morning, she began sweeping the porch. By the fifth, she fed the chickens. He watched her work, noticed how careful her hands were, never wasting movement, never dropping a thing. She didn't speak, but her eyes missed nothing. The broom became an extension of her arms, the kitchen a space she claimed without asking. Some nights, Elijah found supper already warming on the fire when he returned from the fields. Cornbread that didn't crumble. Beans cooked with wild garlic she must have picked herself. He didn't compliment her, but he always finished every bite. Then came the afternoon it rained. A hard, ugly kind of rain. The kind that drives mud into your boots and reminds the bones they're mortal. Elijah returned soaked, his shoulders aching. He opened the door and stopped short. Clara was standing in the middle of the room, soaked as well, her hair dripping onto the rug. In her hands, she held one of his shirts, torn open at the back, blood crusted on the collar. He'd forgotten about it, or maybe just hidden it from himself. She looked at him, her fingers trembling. He took it from her gently and set it down. Didn't speak. But she reached up, slow, like asking permission, and touched the scar on his shoulder. It wasn't the worst one, but it was the deepest. Her thumb brushed the old wound like someone reading Braille. For the first time, Elijah said her name aloud. Clara. She blinked. That night, she sat across the table for supper, ate slowly, as if the food had to ask her forgiveness first. Still, she didn't speak. But she smiled, just once, when Elijah passed her the last biscuit without taking any for himself. Days turned into something softer. She planted rosemary by the porch, washed his work shirts without being asked. He started coming home earlier, just to see if she'd rearranged the spice rack again. But the silence between them wasn't empty anymore. It carried weight, meaning, even music. Then, one evening, trouble returned. They'd run out of feed. Elijah needed to go into town. Clara stood by the barn, drying her hands on a towel, face pale. She didn't want him to go alone. He smiled for the first time in front of her. Don't worry. They talk, but they don't bite. She shook her head. Then, surprising them both, she walked over to the cart and climbed in. Elijah paused. You sure? She nodded. The road into town was quiet, but the tension in the air built like storm pressure. Clara's eyes flicked toward every bend in the path, every shadow. Hallow Creek didn't like change, and it sure as hell didn't like Elijah Booker sitting side by side with a white girl in a mule cart like they were equals. They reached the supply shop. Elijah went inside. Clara waited outside. That's when it started. 3 boys walked past, snorted. One spat near the mule's hoof. Another whispered loud enough for her to hear. Bet she don't scream no more, huh? Laughter. But Clara didn't run. She turned her face toward them, jaw locked. And for the first time, they blinked. She wasn't afraid. Not anymore. A week passed since their visit to town, and nothing was quite the same afterward. The whispers had spread like wildfire. Elijah Booker, the colored rancher, riding through town with a white girl like he had the right. Some called it indecency. Others called it a scandal. One man at the bar said, "Next thing you know, he'll be marrying her." But neither Clara nor Elijah paid it any mind. Not aloud. They kept to the fields, to the work, to the rhythm of things that grew slow and strong. But something had shifted inside Clara. That evening, Elijah found her by the barn, covered in flour, trying to bake something unfamiliar. She motioned awkwardly with her hands, mimicking an apple, then a twist. Elijah watched, unsure. Turnover? He guessed. She smiled. It was their first shared joke, if a smile could be called that. But peace didn't last. One morning, as Elijah was hammering planks along the fence line, A shadow darkened his porch. Clara stood there frozen, clutching a torn note in her hand. Her knuckles were white. He took the note. The paper reeked of tobacco and ignorance. The handwriting was jagged, messy. "White girl ain't no better than a mule if she stays with the likes of you." No name, just a smear of spit across the corner. Elijah folded the paper once, then twice, and set it in the stove's firebox. Clara stood watching him, waiting. He didn't curse. He didn't raise his voice. He just said, "They've got small mouths, and even smaller hearts." Clara didn't nod, but she stepped closer to him than she ever had. From then on, they locked the door at night. But it wasn't fear that settled into the house. It was defiance. That same week, Clara found a broken music box inside a crate in the attic. The ballerina didn't spin anymore, but the notes still wheezed out if she cranked it hard enough. Each night, she played it near the window as she washed dishes, a quiet melody that echoed across the fields. Elijah listened from the porch, boots off, hat in lap. He'd never known a tune could sound like mourning and comfort all at once. And one night, something cracked open. They were sitting by the fire. Clara stared into the flames like they could undo the years behind her. Then, slowly, she lifted her sleeve. Scars. Thin, curved, cruelly deliberate, like someone had written in flesh. She didn't look at Elijah. Just let him see. He didn't speak. Didn't ask who or why or when. He simply reached into his shirt, pulled the collar aside, and showed her his own. A burn mark near his ribs, shaped like the base of a branding iron. Their pain wasn't the same, but pain doesn't ask for permission to relate. She reached for his hand. He let her. That night, for the first time, Clara didn't sleep in the corner of her room. She took the pillow, laid it near the window, and slept facing the stars. The next morning, the sound of hooves came early. Too early. 3 riders, faces hidden beneath hats, but their voices loud and confident. "Booker, we need to talk." Elijah stepped onto the porch. Clara stayed hidden just behind the doorframe. "We heard you've been keeping company you shouldn't. Just thought we'd remind you this ain't some city where rules get loose." Elijah didn't flinch. "You done?" he asked. "Not yet," one of them spat. "We got eyes on your land. Would be a shame if something caught fire." Clara's breath caught, but Elijah simply leaned against the post, calm, still. "You touch my land, I rebuild. You touch her, you won't get the chance again." The men stared. No fear, no yelling, just truth. They left without another word. That night, Clara brought the music box into the main room and placed it beside Elijah's chair. She wound it carefully and sat beside it on the floor. The song played slowly, notes aching into the dark. And for the first time, Clara spoke. Not with words, but a whisper of sound. It wasn't clear, but Elijah heard it. His name. Elijah. A name, spoken from broken vocal cords, is still a name. And from that moment, nothing could silence her again. The rumors didn't stop. They twisted, evolved, gained venom. Some said Clara had lost her mind. Others claimed Elijah had forced her to stay. A few believed something darker, uglier, that she'd chosen him. And in a town like Hallow Creek, choice was the real crime. One morning, Clara found a dead crow nailed to the barn door. Its wings were spread unnaturally wide, like a warning. She didn't scream. She didn't even cry. Instead, she brought Elijah a hammer and waited silently beside him as he pried the nails loose. They buried the bird beneath the rosemary plant she'd once planted with so much hope. When she looked up, her eyes weren't afraid. They were tired and ready. That afternoon, Elijah saddled the mule cart again. Not for supplies, not for errands. He turned to Clara. "We're going into town," he said. "Together." She didn't hesitate. This time she wore the blue cotton dress she'd mended herself. Her hair pulled back with a ribbon made from an old flour sack. She looked like dignity wrapped in defiance. They rode in silence down the same road. The people of Hallow Creek were waiting. Men on porches stopped rocking. Women clutching baskets crossed the street. A child pointed, and his mother pulled his hand down so fast it startled him. The air was thick, heavy, like a storm about to break, but the clouds were made of faces, not thunder. They reached the general store. Elijah stepped off first, tying the mule. Clara followed, her boots striking the wooden steps like they belonged there. Inside, the room fell still. The shopkeeper, a red-faced man named Horace, stared at Clara as if she had dragged sin through his door. "We don't serve," he began. But Elijah's voice cut through him like wind over broken glass. "You sell sugar, don't you?" Horace faltered. Yes, but..." "Good. We'll take 5 pounds. "And coffee," Clara said, out loud, clear, steady. Her voice echoed in the store like a bell in a graveyard. Someone near the back coughed. A jar dropped. Nobody picked it up. Clara stepped forward, her fingers brushing Elijah's arm. Horace moved slowly, like he was touching fire. When they left the store, their sacks full, the silence of the town walked with them. Not a single person met their eyes. Not a single soul offered help or kindness. But no one stopped them either. Power, it turns out, doesn't always shout. Sometimes it walks on quiet feet and dares the world to look away. That night, Clara lit a candle and set it in the window. A small act. But in a place like theirs, it might as well have been fireworks. The next morning, someone had left a bundle by the fence. Flour, dried apples, a note that simply said, "I see you." No name. No threat. Just acknowledgement. That week, Elijah brought out the old table he'd kept in the shed. They ate meals there now, not in silence, but in conversation. Not always words, but shared sounds, gestures, expressions. Clara laughed once. And Elijah, hard, calloused Elijah, smiled like a man who'd never had a reason to before. They repaired the barn door, painted the porch, planted 2 more rosemary bushes. And when the music box finally broke, Clara didn't weep. She placed it on the mantel, a relic of a girl who no longer needed it to feel strong. Then came Sunday. Church day. They didn't go. But they sat on the porch, dressed in their best. Elijah in his cleanest shirt. Clara in the dress she'd worn that day in town. And when the wagons passed by, wheels crunching the gravel, not one person failed to glance toward the house. Most looked away quickly. But one young girl, no more than 7, waved. Clara waved back, and Elijah tipped his hat. They said nothing. But they didn't need to. That afternoon, Clara brought Elijah a notebook. She placed it in front of him and handed him a pencil. "What's this?" he asked. She pointed to herself, then to him, then to the page. He opened it, wrote one word. "Home." She nodded, wrote underneath, "Finally." Years passed. The fields didn't change much. Sun still poured down like honey in July, and frost still kissed the earth cruelly in winter. But the house on the hill, that changed everything. They built it up, little by little. Repaired the shingles. Painted the fence white. Planted wildflowers where weeds once ruled. Nothing fancy. Just enough to say, someone here cared. Clara began teaching herself to write again. Each evening she sat by the window with Elijah beside her. He'd read aloud from old almanacs, and she'd copy the words into a leather-bound notebook. Her hands were slow, stiff, but her letters were clean, careful, like she was telling the page, "I exist, and you will remember me." She titled it, "The Book of Living Things." Not a diary, a declaration. In it, she wrote everything she remembered. The pain, the silence, the threats, the tenderness. She drew pictures, too, of the first rosemary bush, of Elijah fixing the barn roof, of the crow they buried with dignity. Every scar found a sentence, every wound found a place on the page, and beside her entries, Elijah added his own. He didn't say much out loud, but his words were bold in ink, about growing up with hands always half raised, about being judged before he'd ever spoken, about love he never thought he deserved, but found anyway. They didn't write to be published. They wrote so the truth wouldn't die quietly. One autumn, Clara fell ill. Nothing sudden. Just tiredness that wouldn't lift. Her bones ached deeper than usual. Elijah lit the fire early each night, wrapped her in quilts, cooked soup, even though he hated cooking. One morning, she handed him the notebook. "No," he whispered. "Yes," she mouthed. Smiled. He placed it gently on the shelf beside the music box that no longer played. Clara passed a week later, in the blue dress she wore the day she faced the town. They buried her beneath the rosemary. Elijah planted a second bush beside her grave. And for 3 years, he lived alone in the house, talking less, working slower, but always lighting the candle in the window every Sunday night. Until the day a stranger knocked. She was a schoolteacher, black, young, sharp-eyed. She said she'd heard stories about a mute white woman and a black farmer who had once dared to walk through Hallow Creek like they owned it. Elijah didn't speak. He just handed her the notebook. The teacher read it for hours, sitting on the porch beside the rosemary, her lips pressed tight. Then she asked, "Can I copy it?" Elijah nodded. She copied every word, every sketch. Then she left. And slowly, the story spread. Not like fire, but like roots beneath the ground. The book appeared in a college archive, then a podcast, then a news feature. People called it a quiet rebellion. Others called it an untold love story born from hate's shadow. But Elijah didn't care what they called it. He just knew it was real. He died peacefully 2 winters later, notebook still beside the music box. No crowds, no headlines. But when the teacher returned to pay her respects, she found the fields still blooming, and a new signpost at the gate. Booker Farm. Established. With dignity years passed again. The town changed. The streets were paved now. The store had new owners. Most people didn't remember the stairs, the threats, the crow nailed to a barn door. But some did. And they told their children. And those children, black, white, mixed, would sometimes walk up the old trail, past the fence, and stand in front of the rosemary bushes. They didn't say much. Just placed a hand on the wood cross or the porch railing, to thank them, to witness them, to remember that dignity, once planted, doesn't die.